what does inspire me and what has inspired me since I was a kid, I love things that don't actually exist. I love reaching into my mind and just kind of coming up with crazy stuff and kind of imagining things. Literally the other night, about a week ago, I couldn't sleep. And I was just imagining all of these things in my mind, and that's where this guy came from. Because I started thinking about like some kind of a desolated, burned out kind of forest that was just embers and whatnot, and what kind of a creature may be born from that or would dwell in that kind of a setting. And then I started thinking about, I wanted to make it kind of like a dragon, but I wanted it to be kind of designed off of shapes. So I used a series of crescent shapes, basically. So you can see there's the giant crescent here, and then the crescent that would be completed with the horn on the other side. And I just kind of used that shape and that kind of, so I had a general theme that I started with, and then also kind of some shape ideas. I knew I wanted it to be relatively monochromatic, pretty much black and white with just a touch of color for the fire. And actually, I actually drew it a few times quickly, just to kind of get an idea. And then I actually drew it in pencil first. So this is the pencil drawing. And did some shading, not a crazy amount of shading. And then scanned this pencil drawing into the computer and then completed it as the painting that you see on the screen. So that's kind of the process. I love working in black and white. That's my favorite thing to do. And then adding color on top of that, either in glazes or just touches of color. Had a instructor in college that suggested that that was a good way to learn color, because then you're not thinking about color while you're thinking about shadow and light, and you're only focusing on color after the fact, after you've already established all of your shapes and all of your shadows and all of your forms and so on. Then you can start thinking about color. That's not always the case. Actually, most of the time, a lot of my more serious and finished pieces, they start out with just a little nugget of something. Either just I'm sitting there drawing 2 circles for eyes, and then I start building around those eyes, and then pretty soon I have a creature's face. Or, I'm very inspired by Norse mythology. I love that, and I'll put on like some Viking music and just kind of get into the zone and start. I'll show you one of my other images, and that was very much, my frost giant here was very much inspired by just listening to Viking music and trying to get that whole Nordic vibe going, and kind of like tap into that and think about what they would have looked like if they were really living creatures, what they would have looked like, and so on. So yeah, I mean, it differs for me. Sometimes it starts with just a random doodle and then I finalize it to a finished piece. Other times I do have a little bit of a planning process. And then I'm not one of these people that, I know a lot of illustrators will like find all of this reference material and have it all pinned up and they have it all mapped out and they do all these preliminary sketches. I don't necessarily work that way anymore. Like for instance, the elk that I added later in this painting, I didn't even know I was going to put it in there. But I realized it was a frost giant, and I realized it just looked like some big Viking guy that hadn't, he held his breath too long and he was blue skinned or something. There was nothing there for scale. I didn't know that it was a giant just by looking at it. I did, but I was afraid somebody else might not see that. So I realized I needed something in for scale. So that's when I went and looked for some reference and tried to find something that would match the lighting and something that was from that part of the world and so on and so forth. So that's kind of how my reference works. I kind of grab at it as I'm going through the process. So actually I've always been more of a painter than a drawer. Drawing is something that I have to kind of find my way to. So I can't draw very clean line, very definitive shapes and things. I more or less sketch or scribble my way up to forms. And that's kind of my process. So that actually lends itself to the fact that I like to work in black and white, because as I'm building those elements up, then I'm able to kind of start to see those forms and start to revise the forms and whatever. So to somebody that wants to do something like this, I would say just draw all the time. Be obsessed with it. That's what I was as a kid. Every time the other kids would be in the pool, they'd be playing baseball, whatever, I was sitting, somewhere under a tree drawing. I was absolutely obsessed with it. I drew and painted and, all of that constantly. And so it just kind of emerges. You see what you like. I admired all of the old TSR painters from Dungeons and Dragons back in the 80s and stuff. I loved their stuff, and I just wanted to do stuff like that someday. I wanted to be able to create my own worlds and my own characters and my own creatures and stuff. So I just always have had that. No matter what else has been going on in my life, that has always been an underlining theme of my life, to always be kind of on this journey to get all of these things out of my brain that I've had in there since I was a kid, to be fair. So I tell my students a lot of time about a story where I had allotted time to paint, and I got up early in the morning and got everything set up, and nobody was home. I was by myself all day, and just painting. I had, you know, some food and stuff pre-prepared and whatever, and finally was starting to kind of feel tired and looked at the clock, and I hadn't realized I'd been painting for 14 hours. For this one, this actually started out as a piece that I was trying to just do a quick sketch for one of my students, because they wanted to do something where they were, you know, kind of like showing a large entity of some nature kind of facing off against a smaller entity, and what would be the most effective way to show that, you know, massive creature versus the creature that was, or the character that was kind of like overwhelmed. So I played around with some different quick sketches of different perspectives and things, the ways that you could treat it to do that, and I kind of got this crazy idea of maybe like what looked like a mountain just suddenly start rumbling and rocks are falling, and then all of a sudden you realize, you know, this big crack that you thought was a crack and it's showing lava inside is actually a mouth and it's opening, and then suddenly you're seeing, you know, these two big like magma eyes staring down at you, and then just trying to like capture the textures of the rock and then the mist to create the separation and the depth in the painting and things like that. I love narrative. That's my favorite thing. I can't write. I don't have the skill to write, but I have stories in my brain and characters in my brain, and so this is my way of writing. This is what I do. Instead of writing it out and you know, very badly communicating it in Word, I like to draw it and paint it. So